My name is William Carr, and after working 43 years to build a life of dignity, I never imagined my own daughter would be the one to turn that life into a nightmare. On Father's Day, instead of a card or a kind word, she sent me a box. At first glance, it looked harmless, but my wife leaned in and whispered, "Don't open it. Can't you see?" When I looked closer, I froze. The truth left me shaken in a way I'll never forget. What was meant to honor a father became a cruel weapon that shattered the last illusions I had about family. Before I begin, let me ask you, where are you watching from and how old are you? Please subscribe to Family Betrayal Unmasked to hear more powerful stories like mine. I remember that evening as clearly as if it had happened yesterday. The table was set with roast chicken, mashed potatoes, and the familiar hum of family chatter that I thought might bring us closer together. Instead, it became the stage for words that cut deeper than any knife. Samantha, my only daughter, leaned across the table, her eyes sharp with impatience. "Dad, I need the money now, not after you die." The sentence hung in the air like smoke after a firecracker. My hand shook, and the coffee cup I held slipped from my grasp, shattering on the hardwood floor. Brown liquid seeped into the rug, but the real stain was the disrespect in her voice. Peter, her husband, lounged in my leather armchair as though he owned the place. He smirked, swirling the last of his wine. "Come on, Will. She's your only daughter. What's a few thousand to help us out?" He made it sound small, like pocket change, but I knew better. Last month it had been gambling debts. The month before, shopping sprees. The month before that, a loan for a vacation. My so-called generosity had turned into a revolving door of excuses, always opening to another demand. I gripped the inheritance papers tighter in my hand. 30 years of planning, saving, working 12-hour shifts, missing birthdays and holidays, all so my family could have security when I was gone. Yet to Samantha, it was nothing but an open vault waiting to be emptied. I looked at her, her manicured nails, her designer handbag, her expensive highlights. She spoke of suffering, yet everything about her screamed indulgence. Jessica, my wife, tried to break the tension. She stepped into the doorway with a dish towel clutched tightly in her hands. "Please, let's calm down. We can talk about this reasonably." Her voice trembled, not from fear, but from years of watching the cracks in our family widen. Samantha turned on her mother like a storm. "Reasonably, he's sitting on hundreds of thousands while we're drowning in debt you created," I said quietly. My voice wasn't loud, but it carried. It carried years of silent frustration, of sacrifices unacknowledged. Samantha's face twisted, her cheeks flushed. She didn't want to hear the truth. The family photo on the mantel had been knocked face down during the shouting. For a moment I stared at it, the silver frame reflecting the light like a mirror. A smiling 5-year-old Samantha looked back from memory, gap-toothed and innocent, perched on my shoulders at the county fair. I wondered how that little girl had grown into this angry woman demanding my life savings. Peter leaned forward, his tone dropping, trying to intimidate me. "Old man, you're not getting any younger. Why not enjoy sharing your wealth while you're alive, old man?" The words stung more than they should have. Not because of my age, but because of the contempt behind them. They weren't asking, they were circling like vultures. For years I had written checks believing it would hold the family together. That night, staring into the greedy eyes of my daughter and her husband, I realized I'd been feeding wolves. Tell me, if you were in my seat, would you have caved in once more? Or would you have stood your ground and risked losing your child forever? The silence after Peter's words pressed down like a heavy blanket. I could hear the faint ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway, each second marking the distance between the father I thought I was and the one they now accused me of being. Samantha's eyes glistened, not with sorrow, but with fury. She pointed a trembling finger at me, her voice rising. "You're selfish, Dad. Greedy. You'd rather let your only daughter drown than part with money you can't even take with you when you're gone." Her words didn't just sting, they tore through me. Greedy, after 4 decades of overtime shifts, canceled vacations and missed dinners just to keep food on our table and clothes on her back. I clenched my fists under the table, fighting the urge to shout. My mind drifted to the dollhouse she begged for one Christmas, the expensive one downtown. I worked double shifts for 2 months so she could wake up to it. I remembered her squeals of joy as she decorated it, never once knowing the cost it had demanded of me. And now that same child stood before me, branding me as a miser. Jessica stepped closer, her voice barely above a whisper. "Samantha, you can't say those things. Your father has done everything." But Samantha cut her off, her laugh sharp and bitter. "Everything. Please. He hoards his money like a dragon while we're left scraping by." She gestured at Peter, who nodded along with theatrical sympathy. "Do you know what it feels like to struggle while he sits here polishing his retirement accounts? Struggle." My gaze slid to the shiny gold bracelet dangling from her wrist. The fresh salon highlights the brand new sneakers on Peter's feet. Their version of struggle looked remarkably like comfort. My voice broke through their accusations, low but firm. "Your suffering is self-inflicted. Every debt, every so-called emergency, it's the fruit of your choices, not my neglect." The words silenced the room for a moment, but it was the kind of silence that comes before a storm. Samantha's lips parted, her breath uneven. "So that's how you see me, a failure, a burden." I looked at her, trying to find even a flicker of the girl who once drew stick figures of us holding hands. But all I saw was someone who had grown comfortable with blaming me for her every mistake. "I see you as my daughter," I said softly, "but one who's forgotten what respect means." The words landed like a stone in water, rippling through the tension. Peter's jaw tightened and Samantha's face flushed deeper. She grabbed her handbag from the chair, her movements sharp, deliberate. "You'll regret this, Dad. You'll regret every word." I watched her storm toward the door, Peter trailing behind, like a shadow smirking as if the evening had been a game. But to me it was no game. It was the moment I realized the love I had poured into my daughter's life had been twisted into entitlement. So I ask you, when someone you've sacrificed everything for calls you selfish, what do you do? Do you bend under the weight of guilt, or do you finally stand tall? The door hadn't even closed before Samantha whirled back around, her voice sharp enough to slice through the heavy air. "You think you can just dismiss me like that? I'm your daughter, you owe me." The word "owe" echoed in my head, foreign and cruel. I had given her everything, my time, my health, my youth, and still she stood there declaring herself entitled to whatever I had left. Peter pushed past her, stepping closer, until he was nearly in my face. "Listen, old man," he sneered. "You're not doing her any favors by holding on to that money. Be smart. Give her what she deserves before it's too late." His breath reeked of wine, his eyes glinting with arrogance. For years I had let his jabs roll off me, telling myself he was just insecure, just immature. But that night, something inside me snapped. I rose slowly, my knees aching from years of long shifts and heavy lifting, but my voice came out stronger than I expected. "Enough. Both of you. Get out of my house." The room went silent. Jessica gasped softly, her dish towel slipping from her hand. Samantha's face contorted, disbelief painted across her features. She had expected an argument, maybe even a reluctant compromise. What she hadn't expected was defiance. "You can't kick me out of my house," She spat, gesturing wildly around the living room. I grew up here. Mom helped pay for it. You don't just get to erase me from it. Watch me, I said, my hand tightening around the doorknob. I flung the door open, letting the evening air rush inside, carrying with it the scent of honeysuckle and the faint laughter of neighbors. That sound, the sound of ordinary families sharing ordinary evenings, only deepened the contrast of what my own family had become. But Samantha didn't move. Neither did Peter. They stood their ground like predators testing their prey, waiting for me to back down as I always had. Their eyes searched mine, hungry for the apology, the checkbook, the surrender. This time there would be none. Dad, Samantha hissed, her voice trembling with rage, when you're old and sick and need someone to take care of you. Remember this moment. Remember how you chose money over family. Her heels struck the hardwood like gunshots as she finally stormed past me, Peter, trailing with a final glare. The slam of the door rattled the windows, shaking the silence that followed. I stood there, gripping the brass handle, my chest heaving. For 43 years, I had carried the weight of responsibility for everyone else's comfort. Tonight, for the first time, I carried the weight of my own decision. Behind me, Jessica's soft footsteps approached. Her hand touched my shoulder, grounding me. "William," she whispered. But I barely heard her. My mind replayed Samantha's words, money over family, like a cruel refrain. Was she right? Or had I finally, after decades of giving, chosen the only path left: dignity? Tell me, if your child stood in your home demanding your life's savings and calling it love, would you see it as family or as betrayal? The echo of the slammed door still rattled through my bones when Samantha's voice cut through it, colder than the evening breeze that seeped in. She hadn't left after all. She had turned in the doorway, her face twisted with contempt. "You'll regret this, Dad. When you're too weak to stand, when you're begging for help, you'll wish you had treated me differently." Her words landed like venom, not the desperate plea of a daughter, but the calculated threat of someone who had found power in cruelty. For a moment I froze, gripping the doorframe. This was no longer about money. This was about control, about keeping me bound to her through fear of abandonment. Peter stepped forward, his arm draped across her shoulders in a gesture meant to look protective but felt more like possession. He smirked, his voice dripping with mockery. "She's right, old man. You don't want to push us too far. Family has a way of remembering." Jessica gasped from behind me, but I didn't flinch. I had lived long enough to know when someone was bluffing and when they were deadly serious. And in their eyes I saw something I had never allowed myself to see before: predators circling, emboldened by years of my weakness. I took a step closer, so close I could see the slight twitch in Peter's jaw. "You think threats will make me hand over what I've worked for? You think fear will buy you respect?" My voice was low, steady, almost foreign to my own ears. "Not anymore. This house, this life is not yours to claim." For the first time that evening, Samantha hesitated. Just for a breath, her bravado slipped, and I caught a glimpse of the little girl who used to clutch my hand at the county fair. But the flicker vanished as quickly as it came. She lifted her chin, her eyes hardening again. "We'll see about that." She spat before yanking Peter toward the driveway. Their footsteps receded into the night, the screech of tires tearing down the street marking their final retreat. The silence that followed was deafening. I closed the door, pressing my palm against the cool brass handle, my body trembling with the weight of everything unspoken. Jessica stepped beside me, her face pale, her hands trembling as she reached for mine. "William." She wouldn't. Her voice trailed off, unwilling to finish the thought. But I knew. We both knew. Samantha had crossed a threshold tonight. She wasn't just asking for help. She was demanding it with the sharp edge of threat, and Peter, he was fueling the fire, whispering in her ear, turning her sense of entitlement into a weapon aimed at me. I looked at Jessica, my jaw set. If she comes back, it won't be for reconciliation. It'll be for revenge. The words chilled me even as I said them, because deep down I knew I wasn't speaking in fear. I was speaking the truth. So I'll ask you, if your own child stood at your door and promised you'd regret denying them, would you take it as anger in the moment, or a warning of what was coming next? When their car roared out of the driveway, I stood there for a long moment, gripping the door handle as though the brass itself could anchor me. The echo of Samantha's threat still lingered in the air, her promise that I would regret standing my ground. But it wasn't the words that unsettled me most. It was the way she looked at me like a stranger, her eyes full of contempt, where once there had been trust. I turned slowly back into the house. The living room looked like a battlefield. The Persian rug was stained with coffee from earlier, the inheritance documents still scattered across the hardwood like fallen leaves, and on the mantel, the family photo lay face down as though it too had chosen to look away from what we had become. Jessica bent down and picked up the silver frame, setting it upright with shaking hands. "William," she whispered, her voice breaking. "When did we lose her?" I had no answer. I stared at the photo of a gap-toothed little girl perched on my shoulders, frozen in time before entitlement had replaced innocence. My phone buzzed in my pocket. For a fleeting second, I hoped it was Samantha, maybe remorseful, maybe ready to apologize. But the message made my stomach turn. "Dad, I hope you're happy. Your precious money is more important than your grandchildren. Don't expect to see them anytime soon. Emma and Jake, 8 and 6, my innocent grandchildren now being wielded like pawns in their mother's war." I showed the message to Jessica. Her face crumpled. "She wouldn't do that," she said, but even she didn't sound convinced. We both knew Samantha had used the children before cutting off visits whenever I refused to write another check. This time the threat was sharper, colder. Jessica's hand clutched my arm. "Maybe we should reconsider, William. Maybe just help her a little. For the children." Her words pierced me because I knew the truth. My wife's heart was as bound by love for our grandchildren as mine was. Samantha understood that and exploited it like a weapon. But something had shifted in me. "No," I said firmly, "not this time. If we give in again, we're teaching Emma and Jake that love can be bought and sold. That's not the lesson they need from us." Jessica flinched at the steel in my voice. In nearly 4 decades of marriage, she had rarely seen me this unyielding. The silence in the house grew heavier, with each passing minute pressing against us from every corner. No shouts, no footsteps, no slammed doors. Just silence, and beneath it, the quiet dread that this was only the beginning. Samantha's threat wasn't a passing tantrum. It was a promise of escalation. I sank into my chair, staring at the inheritance documents scattered at my feet. For years, they had been symbols of my sacrifice, my promise to secure my family's future. Now they felt like shackles, proof that my daughter saw me not as a father, but as a bank account with a pulse. And for the first time in my life, I realized silence from her wasn't peace. It was preparation. "So tell me, if the people you love most suddenly fall silent after threatening you, do you breathe relief or brace yourself for what comes next?" 6 days passed in uneasy quiet. Not a single phone call, not one of Samantha's tearful apologies, not even a half-hearted excuse. The silence weighed heavier with each sunrise, because I knew my daughter too well. She wasn't the type to let go. She was waiting, plotting, letting her anger ferment into something sharper. On Father's Day morning, I tried to cling to normalcy. I sat on the porch with my newspaper, the Sunday sun warming my face, the smell of Jessica's coffee drifting from the kitchen. Across the street, the Hendersons were loading their car with picnic baskets, their grandchildren tumbling around in laughter. For a moment, I envied them the simplicity of love untainted by greed. Then I heard the low rumble of an engine. A brown UPS truck rolled to a stop in front of our driveway. The driver stepped out briskly, clipboard in hand. "William Carr?" he asked. I nodded, signing the screen before he handed me a medium-sized box. "Happy Father's Day," he added with a grin as though delivering joy. I turned the package in my hands. It was surprisingly light, maybe 2 pounds at most, the size of a shoebox. No return address, no handwriting to reveal who had sent it, just the sterile print of a shipping label. Jessica appeared at the door, drying her hands on a towel. "What's that? No idea," I said, setting it on the coffee table. "Maybe from the grandkids?" My voice sounded hopeful, but even I didn't believe it. Emma and Jake weren't old enough to order something online, and Samantha wasn't the type to spend money without strings attached. Jessica stepped closer, frowning. Her eyes scanned the box with the careful attention she gave to everything. Then her voice dropped low and urgent. "William, don't open it." I froze my hand already on the flap. "What are you talking about?" "Look closer," she whispered. "Can't you see?" I leaned in. At first I saw nothing unusual. Then my breath caught. Tiny puncture marks dotted the cardboard, barely visible unless you were searching for them. Breathing holes. My stomach dropped like a stone. Jessica backed away, her face pale. "Something's alive in there." As if on cue, the box shifted ever so slightly, a faint rustling sound seeping out. My skin prickled, every instinct screaming danger. I stepped back, my heart hammering in my chest. The morning sunlight, once warm and comforting, now seemed harsh and accusatory. The laughter of neighbors across the street felt eerie, like the soundtrack to someone else's life. My wife clutched my arm, her nails digging through the fabric of my shirt. "Don't touch it, William," she whispered. And then it came, the faintest hiss, barely audible but unmistakable. The sound that froze every muscle in my body. A snake. I stared at the box, my throat dry. This wasn't a gift. It was a message, a warning, or worse, a declaration of war. So let me ask you, if a box showed up at your door on Father's Day, light in your hands, but hissing from within, would you see it as coincidence or as revenge? Jessica's grip on my arm tightened until I felt her nails pressing through my shirt. Her eyes, wide with terror, didn't leave the box. "William, call someone. Right now." The hiss had stopped, but the silence that followed was worse. It was the silence of something waiting, something alive crouched just beyond sight. My hand shook as I pulled out my phone, my thumb fumbling over the keypad. For a moment, I wondered if I was overreacting. Maybe it wasn't what I thought. Maybe it was some strange, misguided gift from Samantha, an animal for the grandkids. But even as that thought flickered, I knew it wasn't true. The timing was too sharp, too deliberate. When the dispatcher answered, my voice came out faster than I intended. "We've received a suspicious package," I said. "It's making noises. It was delivered with no return address, and it has breathing holes punched in it." "Sir," the calm voice replied, "can you describe the sounds?" I glanced at Jessica. She gave me a tight nod, her lips pressed into a line. "Hissing," I admitted, "like a snake." Saying it aloud made my stomach churn. "Do not attempt to open it," the dispatcher instructed. "Officers are on their way. Stay a safe distance until they arrive." I lowered the phone, the words echoing in my ears. Safe distance. I looked at the box, sitting so innocently on the coffee table, the same table where my daughter had once scattered crayons and coloring books. Now it was a stage for something darker. Jessica whispered, her voice trembling. Who would do this? William, who would send something alive in a box, but we both knew the answer. The silence between us carried her name, Samantha. The box rustled again, louder this time, as though whatever was inside had shifted, irritated by confinement. My throat tightened. The hiss returned, longer, sharper, and Jessica actually stepped back, clutching the doorway for support. The sound was unmistakable now. It slithered through the room, chilling every corner. "Don't go near it," Jessica pleaded. "Please." I nodded, though my eyes never left the package. My mind was racing, connecting pieces I didn't want to acknowledge. The fight 6 days ago, Samantha's fury, Peter's smirk, her threat that I'd regret denying her, and now a gift delivered on Father's Day of all days. A holiday meant for love and gratitude twisted into something venomous. We stood there in silence, the kind that presses on your chest until you can hardly breathe. The box shifted once more, the faint sound of scales against cardboard. Jessica buried her face in her hands. "This isn't anger anymore," she whispered. "This is revenge." Her words echoed what my heart already knew. 10 minutes. That's what the dispatcher had promised. 10 minutes until help arrived. 10 minutes until someone else could take this nightmare off my shoulders. But in those minutes, every second felt like an hour, and the truth pressed harder against me than the threat of the snake itself. Because the real venom wasn't in the box, it was in the betrayal that had sent it. So I'll ask you, if your own child used fear as a weapon, would you still call it love, or would you finally call it what it is? The sound of car doors slamming outside made Jessica jump. Relief flooded me so hard my knees nearly buckled. Through the window, I saw a police cruiser roll into the driveway, 2 officers stepping out with purposeful strides. One of them, a tall man with sharp eyes, approached the front door and rang the bell with steady authority. I opened the door before he could knock again. "Mr. Carr," he asked, his tone calm but firm. "Yes," I said, stepping aside. "It's in the living room." He introduced himself as Officer Todd Reeves, his partner right behind him. Jessica hovered in the hallway, her apron still tied around her waist, hands twisting nervously in the fabric. "You did the right thing calling," Reeves assured us as he slipped on latex gloves. "Can you describe the package?" I gestured toward the coffee table. The box sat there innocently, almost mocking us, as if daring us to forget the faint hiss that had seeped from its seams. "It arrived about 35 minutes ago," I explained. "No return address, small breathing holes, and—" We heard it hiss. My voice faltered at the end. Reeves's eyes sharpened. Like a snake, Jessica nodded quickly, as though confirming it would make him act faster. "I've dealt with similar cases," he said, crouching slightly to inspect without touching. "Usually non-venomous, but we don't take chances. I'll call animal control for proper removal." He reached for his radio, his tone steady and professional. "Dispatch, this is Unit 47 requesting animal control at 1247 Maple Street. Suspected snake in residential package. Please expedite." The radio crackled back, promising a response in 20 minutes. Reeves turned to us again. "Stay back until they arrive. Don't touch the box." Jessica gripped my arm tightly, but Reeves's calm manner eased the edge of our fear. Still, the weight of his next question fell heavy. "Do you have any idea who might have sent this?" The air in the room seemed to freeze. Jessica's eyes flicked to mine, waiting for me to answer. My mind screamed Samantha's name, but my mouth refused. Instead, I forced a shrug. Could be a prank. Neighborhood kids, maybe. Reeves studied me, his gaze sharp. Kids don't order snakes online, Mr. Carr. This took planning, money, and motive. Motive. The word twisted in my gut. He was right. Only someone who knew us intimately, who knew our address and our tension, could have orchestrated this. But how could I say aloud that I suspected my own daughter Reeves jotted notes in a small pad, his expression unreadable? We'll investigate further. But in the meantime, stay cautious. The hiss came again, faint but undeniable. Jessica flinched, pressing closer against me. Reeves didn't flinch. He simply adjusted his stance, eyes locked on the box. For a moment, I envied him the calm certainty of someone trained to face danger head-on. I had spent a lifetime facing danger too, but mine had always been long shifts at the factory, unpaid bills, and the slow erosion of my health. Never this. Never a daughter who might weaponize Father's Day. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. Officer. I asked, my voice quiet but steady, what happens if it is what we think it is? He looked at me without hesitation. Then we treat it as more than a prank. We treat it as intent. The word hung heavy in the air, a confirmation of what my heart already knew. So I'll ask you, if the law confirmed your suspicions about your own blood, would you still protect them? Or would you finally seek justice? The wait for animal control felt like an eternity. Jessica and I stood 6 feet away in the kitchen doorway, while Officer Reeves remained steady near the box, his hand resting lightly on his holster, as though the cardboard itself might strike. Every minute, the hiss returned, followed by a faint rustling that made my skin crawl. Finally, headlights cut across the front window, followed by the slam of a van door. A man in a khaki uniform strode toward the house, carrying a black case with long tongs protruding from it. Reeves opened the door to greet him. Mike Johnson, Animal Control, the man introduced himself briskly, his voice calm, almost cheerful. You've got a live one in there, Reeves said, gesturing toward the coffee table. Mike approached with the kind of easy confidence that only comes from years of handling creatures most people feared. He pulled on thick gloves, snapped open his case, and withdrew a pair of long, snake-handling tongs. Jessica gripped my hand, her pulse racing against my palm. Let's have a look, Mike murmured, kneeling beside the box. He tapped the side gently with the tong. The cardboard twitched. A hiss erupted louder this time, and Jessica stifled a cry. Yep, he said matter-of-factly. Definitely a snake. Let's see what kind. With careful precision, he pried open the top flaps. The room seemed to hold its breath. For a long moment, there was only silence, then a flash of reddish-brown scales as the snake coiled and shifted. Cornsnake Mike announced, his tone almost casual. 3 feet healthy specimen. Non-venomous, but still not something you want delivered to your living room. He eased the snake out with practiced hands, its body winding smoothly through the tongs before he lowered it into a secure carrier. He latched the lid with a firm click. Beautiful animal, really. Shame it was used for this. Jessica sagged against me, relief pouring from her in a shaky sigh. But my relief was fleeting, quickly replaced by something colder. Because while the snake itself might not have been venomous, the message behind it was. Reeves folded his arms, his expression tightening. Mr. Carr, Mrs. Carr, do you still think this was just a prank? I couldn't answer. The pieces were falling together too neatly. The fight 6 days earlier. Samantha's fury. The silence that followed. The credit card charge I dismissed weeks ago, Reptile Palace, $127.50. The puzzle formed a picture I didn't want to see. Reeves glanced between us. This took planning. Someone had to order the snake, arrange shipping, and pay extra for a Sunday delivery. Whoever sent it knew you'd be home to receive it. His gaze lingered on me, waiting for honesty. Jessica squeezed my arm as if to anchor me. Her eyes begged me not to say it, not to make it real, but in my gut I already knew. This wasn't a prank. It wasn't a coincidence. It was revenge delivered in a box. So I'll ask you, if a harmless snake arrived in your living room but carried a venomous message, would you dismiss it as a joke or see it for the warning it truly was? After Mike carried the secured snake out to his van, the house felt hollow, stripped of any illusion of safety. Jessica busied herself in the kitchen, clattering dishes louder than necessary, her way of smothering fear with noise. I stayed in the living room, staring at the faint watermarks left on the coffee table where disinfectant had been sprayed, the spot where the box had sat like a curse. Officer Reeves lingered, scribbling in his notebook. We'll need to know if you've had any conflicts lately. Family disputes, money disagreements, anything that might explain this. The question hung between us like smoke. Jessica glanced at me, her eyes pleading for silence, for loyalty. I forced a thin smile. Nothing that would lead to this, Vaman, though my stomach twisted at the lie. Reeves studied me, his gaze sharp. He wasn't convinced, but he didn't press. Instead, he asked, any unusual charges on your accounts? Pet stores, exotic suppliers, that was when the memory hit me like a brick to the chest. A month ago, I had skimmed my credit card bill and noticed a charge that puzzled me. Reptile Palace 127.15s. Samantha had access as an authorized user. She'd claimed it was something for the kids. I hadn't thought twice. Now the truth struck with cruel clarity. My throat went dry. She hadn't bought toys or supplies for Emma and Jake. She had bought a snake. For me. For Father's Day. Jessica must have read my face because her hand flew to her mouth, eyes wide with horrified understanding. I didn't speak it aloud, but she knew. We both knew. Reeves closed his notebook. If you remember anything else, call us. Even pranks like this can escalate. He shook my hand firmly before heading out, leaving behind a silence heavier than the hiss we had endured. When the cruiser and van finally disappeared down the street, Jessica and I stood alone in our quiet house. She turned to me, her voice trembling. William, you don't think I do? I said flatly, cutting her off. My voice was steady, but my insides were churning. It was her. It had to be. Jessica shook her head, tears brimming. She's our daughter. No, I said, staring at the empty space where the box had been. She's someone I don't recognize anymore. Our daughter wouldn't do this. Samantha did. That night, I sat at my desk long after Jessica went to bed, the glow of my computer screen casting pale light on years of bank records. Page after page told the story of my misplaced generosity, rent payments, car insurance loans that were never repaid. Each entry was a brick in the fortress of entitlement I had built for her, and now the snake was her answer to my refusal. The betrayal wasn't just in the package. It was in the fingerprints she had left on my financial life for decades. The snake was simply the final confirmation. So I'll ask you, if the very paper trail of your sacrifices proved your child had turned against you, would you still forgive or finally cut the cord? I sat at my desk with the credit card statement glowing on the screen, the words Reptile Palace burning into my mind like a brand. My hand hovered over the phone for what felt like an hour before I finally dialed Samantha's number. Jessica lingered in the doorway, her face pale, her eyes full of the same fear and sorrow that had weighed on me since the box arrived. The phone rang twice before Samantha answered, her voice unnaturally bright. Hi, Dad. Happy Father's Day. How's your morning going? Her cheerfulness struck me like a slap. Either she was the world's best actress, or she was mocking me outright. I forced my voice into something steady. Interesting morning, actually. Oh, she said, feigning curiosity. Did Mom make you pancakes? My fingers tightened around the phone. Samantha, you wouldn't happen to know anything about a package that showed up today, would you? There was a beat of silence too short to be natural, too long to be casual. Then her voice returned, quicker, sharper. What package? I don't know what you're talking about. It might have fooled someone else, but I knew my daughter. She was buying time, grasping at denial. Before I could respond, another sound bled through the line. A laugh. Low, smug, and unmistakable. Peter. Not the laugh of someone surprised, but the laugh of someone entertained by their own cleverness. The sound sank into my chest like ice water. In that careless chuckle, every doubt I had evaporated. This wasn't coincidence. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was them. I closed my eyes, gripping the receiver. Just some confusion with the delivery, I said evenly, my voice deliberately calm. Nothing important. You sure? Samantha pressed. You sound strange. Strange. The word made bile rise in my throat. Strange because my daughter had sent me a snake on Father's Day and was now pretending innocence while her husband chuckled in the background. Strange because the child I once carried on my shoulders at the fair now plotted against me like an enemy. I'm fine, I said quietly. Enjoy your Sunday. I hung up before she could respond. For a long moment I sat there, the phone heavy in my hand. Jessica stepped closer, her hand brushing my shoulder. What did she say? I turned slowly, my voice flat. She denied it, but Peter laughed. Jessica's face fell, her body folding into the chair across from me. Oh, William. I stared at the computer screen, the trail of financial rescues scrolling across the years. Rent payments, car repairs, gambling debts. All of it stacked like evidence against me, proof that I had enabled the very person who now thought terrorizing her parents was acceptable. She thinks this is a game, I said, my voice low, colder than I'd ever heard it. Well, I'm done playing. Because in that laugh, I hadn't just heard mockery, I'd heard permission. Permission to finally draw a line after decades of erasure. So let me ask you, if your child's denial was punctuated by another's cruel laughter, would you still excuse it? Or would you finally decide enough is enough? That night I didn't sleep. I sat in my office with only the soft hum of the computer for company, the glow of the screen throwing long shadows across the walls. Jessica had gone to bed hours earlier, though I doubted she found much rest either. For nearly 30 years, we had answered every one of Samantha's cries for help. We told ourselves we were supporting her, that one day she'd learn. But what she learned instead was that her father's wallet was bottomless. I opened my banking portal, the same site I had visited countless times, to transfer funds for her emergencies. This time I wasn't here to rescue her. I was here to reclaim what was mine. The first thing I checked was the credit card account. My heart thudded when I saw her name still listed as an authorized user, an access I had granted back when she was in college. An emergency measure that had become a lifeline she never let go of. My cursor hovered over the button that read, Remove Authorized User. For years I had hesitated, afraid of what might happen if she truly had to face her own consequences. Tonight, the hesitation was gone. I clicked Confirm. A message popped up. Changes will take effect within 1 business hour. I leaned back in my chair, exhaling slowly. 1 chain cut. Next came the recurring transfers. A neat damning list appeared on the screen, monthly rent deposits into her account, car insurance payments, even the gym membership she insisted was essential for her mental health. Each one was a thread binding me to her irresponsibility. My hand didn't shake as I canceled them one by one. With each click, I felt lighter, as though I were shedding years of manipulation. Finally, I changed the PINs and passwords. She had always been good at watching over my shoulder, memorizing numbers I thought were safe. Not anymore. I replaced them with dates that mattered to Jessica and me, our wedding anniversary, the year we bought this house. Numbers. Samantha could never guess because they weren't about her. By the time I finished, the summary page told a story in bold blue text: credit access removed, automatic payments canceled, security codes updated. It was the clean slate I should have drawn years ago. I closed my laptop and sat back, staring into the darkened room. This wasn't cruelty. It wasn't revenge. It was accountability, something I had denied my daughter for decades. Love without boundaries had turned into a leash around my own neck, and tonight, I cut it. Upstairs, the house was silent. Outside, the street lay in its ordinary calm, neighbors sleeping soundly, unaware that inside my house, a father had finally chosen dignity over dependency. I whispered into the stillness, not sure if I was speaking to myself, to Jessica, or to the ghost of the little girl Samantha once was. No more. It ends tonight. And for the first time in decades, I felt control return, not over her, but over myself. So tell me, if you knew one click could end years of manipulation, would you hesitate, or would you press confirm and finally breathe free? The phone rang at 8:15 the next morning, right on schedule. I had just poured my first cup of coffee, the rich aroma filling the kitchen. Jessica sat across from me, quiet but watchful, as though bracing for a storm she knew was coming. When I saw Samantha's name on the caller ID, I didn't rush to answer. I let it ring twice, savoring those extra seconds of calm before pressing the button. "Good morning, Samantha," I said evenly. Her voice hit me like a physical blow, shrill, panicked, raw. "Dad, what have you done? My card isn't working. I tried to buy groceries, and it was declined. The automatic payment for my car insurance bounced. What is happening?" I took a slow sip of coffee, letting the silence draw out before answering. "Samantha, I know about the package." The line went still. For a moment, I thought she had hung up. Then her voice came back, sharper now. "You've lost your mind. How could you accuse me of something like that?" Because I said, my tone measured. "The trail leads straight to you. That charge on my credit card, Reptile Palace. $127. Do you really expect me to believe it was for Emma and Jake?" She sputtered, then shifted gears with practiced ease. "You don't understand. Peter and I are struggling. We needed stop." My voice came out colder than I intended. "Your struggle is not my responsibility. Your choices created this, not me." There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end, followed by the familiar switch to her victim tone, the one that had opened my wallet more times than I cared to admit. "Dad, please. You don't understand. We're drowning here, and instead of helping, you're punishing me." "Punishment," I repeated, setting the mug down with a quiet thud. "No, Samantha. Punishment is what happens when you commit a crime. This is consequence. I should have enforced it years ago." Her desperation cracked into fury. "Fine. You want to play hardball? Don't expect to see your grandchildren anytime soon. Emma and Jake will grow up never knowing you because you chose money over family." Those words, once my greatest fear, now rang hollow. "Samantha," I said, my voice calm but unyielding, "if you think using your children as weapons will change my mind, you're wrong. That tactic stopped working yesterday morning." For several long seconds, all I heard was her breathing, rapid, uneven, the sound of someone realizing their leverage had crumbled. Then her tone dropped, icy and venomous. "This isn't over, old man. You think cutting me off makes you strong? We'll see about that." The line went dead. Jessica's eyes searched mine, fear and admiration mingling in her gaze. I exhaled, setting the phone down gently. "She'll come here," I said. "She and Peter both." Jessica swallowed hard. And when she does, I look toward the front door, the same door she had stormed through days earlier, and felt something solid take root in my chest. I'll be ready. So I ask you, when someone tries to weaponize love to keep you captive, do you surrender, or do you finally break the chains and let them fall? The morning calm shattered with the roar of an engine pulling into our driveway. Tires squealed against the asphalt, followed by the slam of two car doors. Jessica and I exchanged a glance. We both knew exactly who had arrived. The doorbell rang once sharp and insistent, then again faster, more demanding. When no one answered immediately, the pounding started. "Dad, open this door." Samantha's voice carried the shrill edge of fury, loud enough for neighbors to hear. I rose slowly, my heart steady. Jessica reached for my arm. "William, don't face them alone." "No," I told her softly. "We face this together." I opened the door to find Samantha standing on the porch. Her face flushed, her hair disheveled, as though she had driven here in a storm of rage. Peter loomed behind her arms, crossed, his expression darker than I'd ever seen. "We need to talk," Samantha snapped. "We already did," I replied, keeping my body square in the doorway. I thought I was clear. Clear. She laughed bitterly, her voice cracking. "You're insane. Cutting me off over some ridiculous misunderstanding about a package. You're my father. You can't just walk away from me like this." "There's no misunderstanding," I said evenly. "You sent me a snake." Peter stepped forward, his size filling more of the doorway. "Listen, old man. Maybe you didn't think this through. Samantha has bills, responsibilities. Kids need things." I held his gaze. "And what those kids need most is parents who know how to stand on their own 2 feet." Samantha's eyes narrowed, her face hardening. "Fine. You want to play hardball? You'll never see Emma and Jake again. They'll grow up knowing their grandfather chose money over family." I had feared those words for years, but now they sounded powerless. I leaned forward, my voice steady. "That's not a threat, Samantha. That's a blessing. If you think using children as pawns is acceptable, maybe it's better they don't grow up watching it." Her mouth fell open. For once, she had no retort. Peter, on the other hand, stepped even closer, so close I could smell the sour tang of his breath. "We know where you live, old man. We know your routines, your schedule. You might want to reconsider." Jessica's hand tensed around my arm, but I didn't move. "Are you threatening me, Peter?" "I'm just saying," he sneered, "family relationships go both ways. You cut us off. Don't expect us to go quietly." "Good," I said, my voice sharp as glass. "Because if you don't go quietly, this stops being a family matter. It becomes a police matter." The words landed, and for the first time, I saw hesitation flicker in Peter's eyes. Samantha tugged at his arm, sensing he was pressing too far. "This isn't over," she hissed. "You'll regret treating us like this." "There already are consequences," I said firmly. "You're living them now." For a long moment, they glared at me, their fury like a storm bottled at the threshold. Then Samantha spun on her heel, dragging Peter back toward their car. The engine revved, tires screeching as they tore out of the driveway. Jessica exhaled shakily, her eyes glistening with something I hadn't seen in years. "Jean. You didn't bend," she whispered. I closed the door, locking it with deliberate care. "No. And I won't again. So tell me, if the people who should protect you stood on your porch making threats, would you yield to keep the peace, or stand tall and reclaim it?" The house trembled with silence after Samantha and Peter's car screeched out of the driveway. Jessica leaned against the wall, her breath shallow, her hands still trembling. For nearly 4 decades, I had seen my wife endure storms with grace, but tonight's storm had shaken her. William, she whispered, what if they come back? I walked to the living room window and pulled back the curtain just enough to peer out. The street was quiet, our neighbors oblivious, their porch lights glowing warmly in the evening calm. Across the way, the Hendersons were grilling dinner, their children laughing in the yard. The normalcy mocked me. We didn't live in that kind of peace anymore. They will come back, I said finally. And when they do, it won't be to talk. Jessica turned to face me, her eyes searching mine. So what do? We can't keep living like this, waiting for the next knock, the next demand, the next threat. I sat down heavily in my armchair, the same one Peter had lounged in days ago with that smirk plastered across his face. The memory made my stomach turn. We get help, I said firmly. We draw boundaries they can't cross. She blinked. You mean the police? And more, I said. Legal protections, restraining orders if we need them. And the will, Jessica, it's time. Her lips parted in shock, though I could tell she'd suspected this was coming. You mean cutting her out? I nodded slowly. I can't leave our estate in her hands. Not after this. But Emma and Jake, yes, Jessica, interrupted softly, tears brimming in her eyes. The grandchildren deserve better than to be used as bargaining chips. If we set up a trust for them, she and Peter can't touch it. The thought gave me a flicker of relief. For so long, I'd carried the burden of protecting Samantha from herself. But now I realized the only ones who needed protecting were the children she had dragged into her schemes. Jessica sat beside me, her hand slipping into mine. It breaks my heart, William. She's still our daughter. I squeezed her hand gently, and that's exactly why this is necessary. Because if we don't stop her now, she'll destroy not only us, but herself. For a long while, we sat in silence, the weight of the decision pressing down on us. Cutting your child out of your will isn't just a financial move. It's an admission that the relationship is broken beyond repair, that trust has been shattered so completely it can't be pieced together. But as I stared at the family photo on the mantel, the one that kept finding itself face down lately, I knew we had reached that point. The smiling little girl in that picture didn't exist anymore. In her place stood a woman who sent snakes in boxes and made threats at her parents' doorstep. I turned to Jessica, my voice steady. Tomorrow I'm calling Margaret Summers. She'll know how to make it airtight. No loopholes, no access. Not ever again. Jessica nodded, her tears finally spilling. Then tomorrow we begin again. So I'll ask you, if protecting your peace meant cutting out the child you once adored, could you bear the heartbreak? Or would you keep paying the price of silence? The following morning, I found myself driving downtown, the manila folder of documents heavy on the passenger seat beside me. My hands gripped the steering wheel tighter than usual, the familiar streets outside my window blurring with each stoplight. I had been to Margaret Summers' office many times over the years, estate planning, transferring property, helping Jessica manage her mother's affairs, but never with a heart this heavy. The building was, as I remembered, 3 stories of granite-polished brass doors, a place where families came to protect their futures. I rode the elevator to the 3rd floor, the hum of its machinery matching the weight pressing against my chest. Margaret greeted me at the door with her usual professionalism, her gray hair pinned neatly, her sharp eyes softening only slightly when she saw me. "William," she said, extending a hand. "You sounded urgent on the phone. Sit down. Tell me what's happened." I sat across from her mahogany desk, the leather chair creaking under me. I slid the folder toward her. "It's about my daughter. About Samantha." Margaret adjusted her glasses, scanning the top document. "You mentioned something about a dangerous package." I nodded, my throat tightening. "A snake. Delivered to my house on Father's Day. No return address, but I know who sent it." My voice cracked despite my best effort to stay composed. It was her. It had to be. Margaret's pen hovered over her yellow legal pad, then began to move in steady strokes. This goes beyond family tension, William. That's harassment, potentially criminal. But let's address your priorities. What do you want to accomplish today? I leaned forward, clasping my hands together. I want to make sure she can't touch a dime of what I've worked for. I want Jessica secure, and I want my grandchildren's future protected. But Samantha and Peter, my jaw tightened. They get nothing. Margaret nodded thoughtfully. We can establish an educational trust for the children. Independent trustees will manage the funds, releasing money only for documented school expenses. That way, Emma and Jake are provided for, but their parents can't use the money to fuel gambling or shopping. The idea lifted a weight I hadn't realized I was carrying. For the first time in weeks, the thought of my grandchildren brought relief instead of dread. Do it, I said firmly. She continued, flipping to another set of documents. We'll also amend your will to exclude Samantha entirely. And if you'd like, we can put legal barriers in place, restraining orders, protections for your assets. Based on what you've described, I recommend it. I exhaled slowly, the sound almost like a release of years of pent-up pressure. Yes. All of it. Margaret's assistant entered, placing a stack of prepared forms on the desk. As I signed each page, my signature felt like a hammer, driving nails into the coffin of the relationship I once thought unbreakable. 30 years of financial rescue gone in 30 minutes of legal clarity. When I finished, Margaret set her pen down and looked me square in the eye. William, these decisions are never easy, but they are necessary. You've chosen to protect your wife, your peace, and your grandchildren. That's not selfish. That's wise. I stood, tucking the folder back under my arm. Outside, the city hummed as usual, but for me the world had shifted. I wasn't just a father anymore, I was a man who had finally drawn the line. So tell me, if you had the chance to protect your future with one painful decision, would you sign the papers? Or leave the door open to further betrayal? By the time I returned home that afternoon, Jessica was waiting in the kitchen, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea that had long gone cold. She looked up as I entered, her eyes scanning my face for answers. I set the folder on the table and slid into the chair beside her. It's done, I said. The will's amended. The trust for Emma and Jake is in place. Tears welled in her eyes, though she tried to blink them back. And Samantha, she's out, I said plainly. The words felt brutal in my mouth, but necessary. Margaret was clear: if we want peace, we have to close every door that lets her pull us back in. Jessica's hands trembled as she set her mug down. William, she's still our daughter. She is, I admitted, but she's also dangerous. And that's why we're taking the next step. Her brows furrowed. Next step, I opened the folder and pulled out a stack of papers Margaret had prepared. Restraining order. Margaret documented everything: the snake, the threats at our door, Peter's words about knowing our routines. The court will see it for what it is: harassment and intimidation. Jessica's lips parted, but no sound came. She looked from the papers to me, torn between grief and relief. Do you really think it's come to this? I reached across the table, covering her hand with mine. Just last week, our daughter sent a live snake into our home. She and her husband stood on our porch and threatened us. If we don't act now, what's to stop them from escalating again? Her silence was answer enough. Slowly she nodded, and I knew she understood. The next morning, we drove back downtown together. Margaret greeted us with the efficiency of someone who had walked countless families through situations like ours. She led us into a quiet conference room, sliding the paperwork across the polished oak table. All we need are your signatures. Once filed, the court can issue temporary protection within 24 hours with a hearing to follow for permanence. I picked up the pen, my hand steady. Each line I signed wasn't just ink, it was a boundary carved into stone. Jessica signed beside me, her script smaller, shakier, but resolute. Margaret gathered the papers, tapping them neatly into place. By tomorrow, if Samantha or Peter contact you, it will be a violation of court order. Police, not you, will handle it. Driving home afterward, the car was quiet except for the steady hum of the engine. Jessica stared out the window, her reflection pale against the glass. Finally, she spoke. It feels like we've lost her forever. I kept my eyes on the road. Maybe we already had Jess. Today just made it official. That night, I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. For years, I had feared what would happen if I pushed Samantha too far, if I cut her off completely. But now that the line was drawn, I felt something unexpected. Not fear, not regret, but peace. Because tomorrow the law would stand where my love had always faltered. So I'll ask you, if your child forced you to choose between family and safety, would you cling to blood ties, or sign the order that finally sets you free? The papers were filed by noon the next day. Margaret called to confirm that both Samantha and Peter had been served hand-delivered copies of the restraining order and the amended will. I thanked her, though my voice sounded hollow, as though gratitude couldn't quite capture the magnitude of what she'd done for us. When I hung up, I sat for a long moment in the stillness of my office, staring at the phone. For the first time in years, it didn't feel like a ticking time bomb, waiting for Samantha's name to flash across the screen. The silence wasn't oppressive anymore. It was protective. Jessica found me there. My hands folded in my lap, my gaze fixed on the sunlight filtering through the blinds. She leaned against the doorframe, her expression softer than it had been in weeks. So, it's official. I nodded. She can't contact us without breaking the law. And if she tries, it's not our burden anymore. She crossed the room and sat beside me, her hand slipping into mine. For a while, neither of us spoke. We didn't need to. The air itself felt lighter, as though the weight of decades had been lifted off our shoulders. Later that afternoon, we decided to take a walk. Something simple, something ordinary, something that hadn't been possible without the constant shadow of Samantha's demands. The neighborhood was alive with normalcy, children riding bikes, sprinklers ticking across freshly cut lawns, couples waving as they passed. For once, I didn't feel envy. I felt belonging. Do you remember? Jessica said quietly as we walked. How we used to do this every evening, before the phone calls, before the arguments, before... Her voice faltered. I squeezed her hand gently. Yes, and we can do it again. When we returned home, we made dinner together in the kitchen, a simple meal of roast chicken and vegetables. No shouting, no interruptions, no threats lurking behind every vibration of my phone. Just the clatter of pans, the hiss of roasting meat, and the soft hum of conversation between two people who had weathered storms together for nearly 4 decades. Afterward, we sat at the kitchen table sipping tea. Jessica's eyes glistened as she studied me. It feels strange, she admitted. To be free, to not be waiting for the next crisis. It feels, I said slowly, like we finally took our lives back. We both turned at the sound of children laughing outside our neighbor's grandchildren chasing fireflies in the twilight. For a brief, painful moment, I thought of Emma and Jake. Their faces, their giggles, the warmth of their small hands in mine. It hurt to know Samantha might keep them away, but the trust Margaret had set up gave me solace. Their future would be protected even if their mother wasn't. That night, as Jessica and I prepared for bed, I paused at the bedroom window, looking out into the calm, suburban street. For the first time in decades, I felt no dread about what tomorrow might bring. No manipulation, no guilt, no fear. Just quiet. So I'll ask you, when the storm of betrayal finally passes and silence settles in, do you grieve what's gone, or embrace the peace that's left behind? That evening, after Jessica had gone to bed, I found myself standing in the living room, staring at the mantel. The family photo sat upright now, the silver frame catching the glow of the lamp. In the picture, a 5-year-old Samantha clung to my shoulders at the county fair, her face lit with the kind of joy only children know. Her gap-toothed grin beamed as though the world was nothing but promise. I lifted the frame, carefully running my thumb along the glass. "Where did you go?" I whispered to the frozen smile. My mind drifted to memories that once defined her burned toast and orange juice on Mother's Day mornings, crayon drawings of stick-figure families holding hands, her squeals of delight when I surprised her with that expensive dollhouse. Back then, every sacrifice felt worth it, every overtime shift, a small price to pay for her happiness. But tonight, the contrast was unbearable. That little girl had grown into a woman who used her children as bargaining chips, who laughed as her husband mocked me, who sent a live snake into my home on Father's Day. The gap between then and now felt like a canyon I could never cross. I set the photo back down and sat heavily in my chair. Jessica padded softly into the room, a robe wrapped around her. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked. I shook my head, just remembering. She followed my gaze to the photo, her eyes softened. "I miss her too." "But it isn't her anymore," I said quietly. "That little girl doesn't exist. What we have now is someone who looks like her, but—" My voice trailed off. Jessica settled into the chair across from me. "William, people change. Sometimes for better, sometimes for worse. We did our best. But she chose her path." I rubbed my temples, the ache of regret pounding behind my eyes. I keep asking myself if I did this. Did I spoil her too much? Did I teach her that money was the answer to every problem? Jessica reached across the table, taking my hand. "You taught her love. You taught her sacrifice. But somewhere along the way, she mistook those gifts for entitlement. That's not on you, William. That's on her." Her words offered comfort, but only so much. I thought again of Emma and Jake, the way their laughter had once filled this house, their drawings hanging proudly on the fridge. I prayed they wouldn't inherit their mother's bitterness. Maybe the trust fund would give them a chance to grow into something better, something freer. I rose, kissed Jessica's forehead, and whispered, "Let's go back to bed." But as I turned off the lamp, the photo on the mantel caught my eye one last time. The smiling child looked back at me, frozen forever in innocence. And I knew the hardest truth of all: sometimes love isn't enough to keep someone from becoming a stranger. So tell me, when you look back at old photos, do you see the person they were, or the person they became? The next evening, Jessica and I sat at the kitchen table with nothing more than a simple dinner between us. Roast chicken, green beans, and the kind of quiet that had once felt heavy, but now felt like a gift. The tension that had ruled this house for years seemed to have lifted, leaving behind a stillness we hadn't known in decades. Jessica sipped her chamomile tea, her eyes watching me with a gentleness that steadied my soul. "It feels different," she said softly. "It is," I replied. "For once, we're not waiting for the phone to ring for the next demand, the next crisis. This is what peace feels like." She smiled faintly, though sadness lingered in her eyes. "I never thought it would come to this, William. I always hoped she'd turn things around, that she'd realize how much we've done for her." I nodded, my fork resting untouched on my plate. I did too. But love without boundaries isn't love, it's surrender. And I won't surrender anymore. We finished dinner slowly, talking about small things, her garden, the Hendersons' new puppy, the plans we'd once put off because of Samantha's constant chaos. For the first time in years, our conversation wasn't dominated by worry. It was just us again, two people who had weathered storms together and finally found shelter. Afterward, we moved into the living room, the lamplight casting a soft glow. Jessica curled up beside me on the couch, her head resting against my shoulder. We sat in silence, listening to the faint sounds of the neighborhood, the laughter of children, the distant bark of a dog, the hum of a lawnmower finishing its work. Normal sounds. Sounds we had forgotten could exist without being drowned by shouting or manipulation. I wrapped an arm around her, feeling the steadiness of her breathing. "Do you regret it?" I asked quietly, her head tilted up, cutting her out, all of it. The will, the restraining order, drawing a line so final. She was silent for a moment, her gaze distant. Then she shook her head. No. Because what we protected isn't just money, William. It's our marriage, our home, our peace. She may not see it, but we saved what she was trying to destroy. Her words sank deep into me. I kissed her forehead and whispered, "Then maybe for the first time we did the right thing." We stayed like that until the house grew quiet and the day faded into night. When I finally climbed into bed beside her, the weight that had sat on my chest for years was gone. No anxious thoughts about the next demand. No dread about the next knock on the door. Just quiet. Just rest. Just freedom. And as I drifted into sleep, I realized something: the end of one relationship had given birth to another, not between father and daughter, but between husband and wife, reclaiming the life we had built long before Samantha learned to twist it. So I'll ask you, when the storm finally ends, do you mourn the wreckage left behind? Or do you embrace the calm that lets you live again? Looking back, I realized the snake in the box wasn't the real danger. It was the wake-up call I needed. For too many years, I mistook enabling for love, believing that every check I wrote would buy peace, repair wounds, or keep my family intact. But all it bought was entitlement, disrespect, and the slow erosion of my dignity. That Father's Day, my daughter didn't just send me a snake. She sent me the truth about who she had become. By cutting her off, by changing the will, by filing the restraining order, I finally understood that love without boundaries isn't love at all. It's surrender. And sometimes the hardest act of love is to step back, to refuse to feed the very behaviors that destroy relationships. Jessica and I may have lost a daughter that day, but we gained back our peace, our safety, and our marriage. To those listening, ask yourself, have you ever sacrificed too much, mistaking it for love? Have you ever enabled someone until it nearly cost you everything? If so, maybe my story will remind you that boundaries are not cruelty. They are protection. Have you ever faced betrayal in your own family, and how did you handle it? Share your story in the comments, I'd like to know. If this story meant something to you, please like, subscribe, and share it. Thank you for listening.